We started with a seed round of $500,000, and then we raised a Series A in August 2014 of $5 million. But then our Series B was in December 2017, so almost 3 years later, and that one was $25 million, so substantially more. And then 18 months later, in 2018, we raised another 15. And the best advice, by the way, that I got was raise a lot of money and spend very little. So right now, we are actually processing in real time, data that is arriving for more than 700,000 cameras that are running AI models at the edge. So we see 94% of US roads at least once per month, and we collect more than 20 million detections per day of this type of road objects, and are able then to feed this information into maps or also into algorithms that are doing automated driving and need to make decisions on where to go and how to drive safely.
Max Pog builds a startup studio.
So, João Barros, today we will talk about your journey, entrepreneurial journey, how Veniam was acquired by Nexar, about technologies, communication networks, information security, and about your trip to Silicon Valley for 3 years to raise $45 million for Veniam.
Perfect.
So, can you share your story, how you decided to found Veniam in 2012?
I am a little bit of an accidental entrepreneur because actually, when I finished my master's degree, I had done an internship at a very large German company and had decided that working in a huge corporation was not for me. So I decided to do a PhD and then become a professor. And I was actually, thinking that was going to be the rest of my life, was to be doing research and training students and doing projects. And so what happened was that we started developing these technologies to enable vehicles to share data with each other and with the cloud. It wasn't called the cloud at the time, it was the internet, and building mesh networks of these moving things. And some companies started getting interested in our technology, like Cisco, and telecom operators like NTT Docomo were already funding a part of our research. And so I knew we had something valuable there. And I had the opportunity at the time to work with the Portuguese Foundation for Science and Technology, FCT, on international partnerships. And in particular, there was one with Carnegie Mellon University, where we were basically funding a lot of dual degree PhD programs and also research projects with the Americans. And we realized that, in certain areas, certainly not all areas, but in certain areas, the research and technology that the Portuguese groups were developing was just as good as what we were seeing in the US. But the Americans were like 20 times better at turning that research into products and services and companies. And so I started thinking, well, this is something that I would love to learn how to do. And the only way to learn these things is actually to do them. And so when the economy started going really bad after the financial crisis, in particular the Euro crisis, which hit Portugal in 2011, our students were all considering, either giving up on science and going abroad. And I thought, we have to do something. And so together with my colleague, Susanna from the University of Aveiro, we decided to start Veniam, together also with two American co-founders, so Robin Chase and Roy Russell. But the point really for me at the time was this mixture of on the one hand, being very curious about learning how to do startups, and this real necessity from our students to have other opportunities outside of what the Portugal at the time was able to offer, and the only way really was to create new companies and new jobs.
So first there were 4 co-founders, am I right?
Yes. So it all started actually with one evening in which I had invited my PhD students and postdocs to my house. It was around Christmas, about 16 people, and everybody was really, really depressed. And I thought, I have to do something. And so we said, 2012 is going to be the year where we're going to take all of these amazing technologies that we've been developing, and we're going to take them to the market. And I have no idea how to do that, but in January we start. And so we actually started 2 companies. So one was Veniam, together with my colleague Susanna, and then with Robin Chase and Roy Russell in the US, and StreamBolico, which was with 3 of my PhD students, who basically Rui Costa, Diogo Ferreira, and Paulo Oliveira, who basically had also technology for Wi-Fi networks and broadcasting information. And and so we decided to launch those 2 companies. And in fact, they were created on the exact same day in the exact same notary.
Were they bootstrapped, or you just were an enthusiast without salaries and you decided that, we will sell the technologies and then we'll have money to do the work?
So they were actually incubated in the university incubator. And so we got a bit of office space, and we had some coaching and training. And with Veniam, we actually started by raising $500,000 in seed funding. And the reason was that we realized that to develop, a tech company that would produce software that enables vehicles to move massive amounts of data between vehicles and the cloud, we would need, millions and millions of dollars in venture capital. So it was not something that you could bootstrap, because this was deep tech, high tech, that still required quite a bit of effort on the R&D side, and proving concepts and getting also into long development cycles with hardware and software at the time. So this is why we decided to go and raise money from day one. With StreamBolico, we actually had an initial contract to develop a solution for broadcasting data over Wi-Fi. And so there was an initial project, so it was more bootstrapped initially, and then they also raised more money.
Mm-hmm. And for Veniam, you fundraised from Portuguese angel investors overseas?
Actually, we had only one initial angel investor who happened to be a relative of mine. So it was really literally friends and family. And the reason was that at the time there was also some government grant available, which we won, but it required matching funds. So I talked with my aunt, who at the time, had just retired, and she doesn't have any children, so she helps her nephews and nieces when they need. And I told her about the project, and she said, well, how much do you need for this matching funds? So we got some money from her, and then we were also able to get one angel investor in New York, another one in London, and a couple more in Boston. Some of them were early investors from Zipcar, which was the first company that my co-founder Robin had created. Others were people I knew from my university network since I had been at MIT and had worked closely with Carnegie Mellon as well.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that Cisco were interested in your technology before you started the company. How companies usually find potential new technologies in universities? So how was this?
So these large corporations, all of them have teams that do technology scouting. So they, talk with startups and the research groups and so on. And they also have grants for professors. So the way it worked for me was that I met one of the VPs of Cisco that was working in IoT and Internet of Things at the time. he saw some of our prototypes, and then he pointed me to these grant programs. And so we wrote a proposal and we got funded. And then they would visit us on a regular basis. And the nice thing about these grants is that, especially for universities, they are very open-ended, so you can, it's quite discretionary. They mostly select professors and researchers that are doing things that are interesting, but they don't prescribe what you need to do all that much. They give you a lot of freedom, and then what they want is access and early knowledge to whatever ideas, whatever things that you are working on.
Can you please describe what were the products of Veniam and StreamBolico at this time, and what were first customers?
Yeah, they were actually quite different. And so for Streambollico, it was a software solution that basically enabled, say, in a stadium or in a crowded space, it used a technology called network coding that basically makes it very, very efficient and reliable for you to send the same stream of video to me or to you. We may have different channels, but this video is going to work perfectly with great quality for you or for me, even though the channels are different over the wireless medium. For Veniam, actually, we went through three main stages. So the first one, we basically developed a hardware together with the software solution that you could put in any vehicle, so a little communication box, and it had multiple wireless interfaces. So it had cellular, so at 3G at the time, but then later 4G. It had Wi-Fi. And it also had V2X, so vehicle-to-vehicle communication, in particular the 802.11p standard, DSRC, which was developed specifically for vehicles to communicate with each other. And so it was a communication box, if you like. And we first deployed it initially in taxis, and then across all the buses in Porto. They still use it to provide two things. One is free Wi-Fi to passengers, and the other one is to collect data for smart city applications. And so we built this network, and we raised our Series A, which at the time was about $5 million. That basically, we had proven that it's possible to build a city-scale network of vehicles that is able to collect data and offer free Wi-Fi to people. And the plan was basically now to go and sell these boxes, so that was the product, to all these different fleets, with the promise that they could get a lot more data at a fraction of the cost of a typical cellular-only solution. The challenge at the time was that fleets didn't have all that much data yet, because there were no cameras. There were very few fleets that were actually offering internet to passengers. So we were very early in the market for that. And so we closed a few deals with fleets, but it was very hard to scale that business. And so in 2017, we decided, let's start talking with the automakers. So with the auto OEMs, like Ford, PSA, now it's called Stellantis, Volkswagen, Honda, Toyota, all these different car makers, because they, at the time, decided to do over-the-air software updates. So Tesla was showing that, you can keep improving vehicles even after you sell them, and you can have subscription-based services for, smart navigation, autopilot, additional content, streaming, all of these different things. So suddenly, automakers were all talking about the connected car and how important it was going to be able to transfer data. And indeed, when they saw that, Veniam has a software that is able to save us, 60 to 80% of the data costs, let's try it. And so we were able to get a number of engineering projects and proof of concept. And so we decided to drop the software, the hardware completely, so no more hardware, focusing 100% on software, and with a platform that had a software development kit that you could install in these vehicles and basically manage all the communications. So the connection management, which basically decides which networks to use, the data management, which basically says what data do I need to send now, what data do I need to send later, and all the security management as well around these data communications. We started having, more and more traction, and so we dropped the fleet business completely, which is a very hard thing to do because we had people that are working on hardware, people that were working on operations who were no longer needed. And it was the first time in my life, that I actually had to, do a restructuring of the company and help people find other solutions. So it was really a difficult time from that point of view. But we raised $25 million from our Series B, and so we had some capital to go after this automotive opportunity. Actually, we had raised that money even before going all into automotive. So I also had to convince my board and my investors that was the right way to go. But they were always very understanding, and I had an exceptional relationship with both True Ventures and Union Square Ventures, and then all the other companies that also invested in us. And all of that was going well. With automotive, you enter a really long product development cycle of 3-4 years, so it's very different from offering free Wi-Fi to people and measuring every day. So we're looking at large engineering projects, and then COVID hit, and the automotive industry just basically stopped. And that was the third time that we had to rethink our business strategy. And I had started talking with companies that did dash cams, so basically cameras that have one facing outwards and one facing inwards that are able to avoid accidents by basically, analyzing with computer vision what is happening, and whenever there's an accident, uploading videos to be able to analyze what happened. And now, finally, you had devices in vehicles that actually needed to upload huge amounts of data, like videos and images and so on. And so it was a perfect match between our networking technology and the data consumption of these devices and these solutions. And so our engineering team did an amazing job at being able to actually put our IP, which at the time already had like 440 plus patents and lots of software, put it in a software...
400?
and 45
Wow.
Patents to be precise.
How is it possible?
And so we were able to basically then have a very efficient software development kit that you could put in these devices like these dash cams, these cameras, and deploy. And so we were able to close a number of deals, and then we had the option, either we continue raising more money or we find an acquirer for the company. And Nexar happened to be one of our best customers. So it was actually a very natural merger to join the two companies.
And how StreamBolico was developing during these years?
I was on the board for a couple of years, and then actually because I was CEO of Veniam, it was a full-time job and an education. So eventually, my PhD students ran with it. It's also, for me, it was always in my mind that especially those students that had worked with me during their PhD for 5 years or more, there comes a time where you have to let go as an advisor, and where it's important for them to take on their own path. There was another student called Luisa Lima, who also started several companies, including FIDE, that then got acquired by Barracuda, and the StreamBolico team pivoted the company. It's called Codavel now. They raised more money, and they went into content distribution networks, completely independent and on their own, and have been also innovating a lot in that space, which is very different and orthogonal from what we were doing at Veniam.
Can you explain what Nexar, what is its product, and at the time when you sold the company to Nexar, so what was this integration of your software, as I understood, to Nexar?
No, for sure. Nexar is the leading, dash cam provider for consumers in the United States, and also more recently fleets. So more and more fleets are adopting Nexar, and the product is in a first stage an intelligent dash cam. That basically you install in your vehicle and provides all sorts of different safety-related features. But it's way more than that. It's actually a platform that is able to see the world from what all these cameras are able to pick up. And so right now we are actually processing in real time, data that is arriving for more than 700,000 cameras. That are running AI models at the edge to detect, for example, stop signs or work zones, road defects. So all of the things that you care about when you have to map the world, we are able to detect based on images. So we see 94% of US roads at least once per month, and many of them, multiple times a week and even multiple times an hour in places like Manhattan and so on. Every few minutes, we're able to see. And we collect, more than 20 million detections per day of this type of road objects, and are able then to feed this information into maps or also into algorithms that are doing automated driving and need to make decisions on where to go and how to drive safely. We're really at a very exciting time because we launched our real-time mapping platform a few months ago, and we already have a lot of traction for that. And so my job now as Chief Platform Officer at Nexar is to help build the ecosystem around this platform so that we maximize the number of eyes on the road that we have. And we turn that into data that lots and lots of mobility applications and services can use.
And what are these smart city applications? For example, I don't know, Waze or Google Maps, or what are customers of Nexar services?
Well, Waze is a good analogy because Waze is able to collect, detections of things that are happening in real time, but it requires human users. And so it's
network effect product.
And it's the main thing is that it's obviously limited to what users see and detect, and it takes some time, and we do that in a fully automated way. So the cameras are seeing it, they're detecting it, they're notifying it, if you think of Google Street View, you have a picture from last year or from 2 years ago. Here you have, in many locations, pictures that are a few minutes old, and you get a real view of what is happening. And so this is possible to do now at an unprecedented scale because we're also able to reduce the unit cost of seeing and mapping the world dramatically. For one, you have crowdsourcing, so you don't have dedicated mapping vehicles or street view vehicles. You have actually hundreds of thousands and soon millions of vehicles that are uploading data. The second is that we're actually running the artificial intelligence at the edge. So we're not uploading all the images and processing it in the cloud because it would be tremendously expensive, both from the connectivity cost as well as the processing and storage cost. We're doing it in the devices or in the smartphones that are connected to the dash cams. So that reduces further the cost dramatically. And then we have also the ability to upload visual evidence on demand so that we can actually prove what we are claiming. And so one example for smart cities is work zones, where basically vehicles see work zones that take a picture, you have the cones and so on. They're tied to a timestamp, so cities can now verify, are people actually working on this work zone? Does it have a permit? Is it blocking the traffic? Without having to send inspection vehicles to see it. So that's one example. Or detecting, hey, these lane markings are no longer fresh. We have to go there and fetch, there's a pothole that we need to fix. Or hey, there are vehicles that are parked in second lane and are blocking. And when there's an accident, our systems upload automatically a video. We have a first notification to the insurance company. Hey, something happened. So they know automatically, even before the person has to call and say something happened. And from a short video, we are actually able to provide a detailed analysis of what happened during the accident. And this greatly accelerates the claim processing, and so that after an accident, all the path towards insurance is much faster and cheaper.
Mm-hmm. So what is the business model of Nexar? So you have dash cameras which are attached to cars somehow. Is it B2C model that customers decided, oh, I'm going to put this? Or it is B2B when you partner with some huge company and do this? And so what are this ecosystem of customers and users of this product? So insurance companies, for example, do they pay to Nexar, or so what is the business model?
So it's a combination of three main components. So you have the cameras, so the hardware, you have subscriptions, and you have data services. And so for the camera, consumers can buy it online, and they do, Shopify or Amazon. And the connected camera comes with a subscription, which is a monthly fee for services to the consumer or to the fleet. So we have a fleet solution that has a dashboard where someone who owns a small fleet can see where the vehicles are, can get notifications if there were hard brakes or any other events that are noticeable, where they have to have a conversation with whoever was driving the vehicle. And so that's on the camera side in the subscriptions. And basically, the role for us, besides obviously protecting our customers and their vehicles, is to have as many eyes on the road as possible, right? And then, because then we get the data, and then we have different customers, mapping companies, autonomous vehicle companies that are using our videos and to train the AI, and also companies that sell services to municipalities. So a very broad range of data customers. And we typically have like a little bit of a la carte of saying, people are either interested in detections of things that we are seeing, or they're interested in changes. So what changed? There was a stop sign over there and now it's not because someone vandalized it, or the speed limit changed and I need to know the speed limit so that I know whether I'm compliant or not with my truck. So that type of thing. Or people want images because they want to verify something, or they want videos to train AI, for example. So that's like the modality. Then you have the types of objects that people are interested in. Road signs, they're interested in the work zones, examples like that. Then you have another dimension is whether the information is provided in real time and near real time, or whether it's a data set over a period of time. So more curated data. And then they consume it through an API, so an application programming interface, or through a user interface. So based on what the customer needs, we work out a solution, and then it has a recurring fee depending on the type of data service that they require.
Do you plan to create a competitor to Waze and other maps that help drivers to?
Well, in this entire ecosystem about capturing information from the real world, there's always a mix of competition and collaboration. And the collaboration is really needed because it's very hard for a single company to be able to map the entire world, detect everything that is happening in the entire world. Think Tesla, for example. Tesla has cameras in their vehicles, They are able to capture a lot of images and data, and they do. And they also are very advanced in AI in detecting all of these different things. But Tesla, has a limited number of vehicles, and they are very localized in affluent parts of the cities, so they're not everywhere. Plus Tesla is competing against all these other vehicles and automakers that basically have the interest to have that type of data, and Tesla wants to protect its own competitive advantages. So we are a third party that is not selling vehicles, that is able to aggregate data from a lot of information, from a lot of sources, not just connected vehicles, but also cameras on fleets. And so we're able to be a platform that provides added value by combining all of these information sources. And so we'll collaborate with those companies, and we'll offer in certain areas layers that are competitive too.
Tesla, like you also, one day you will take data of Tesla to map, or they will use your data to
I think eventually they will want to use our data, because I think they're going to see that we're able to provide more coverage, fresher data than they're able to get with their fleet alone. And so eventually we do believe that being able to pull all this information and all this data, which in a way is how Google Maps has worked so far, is that it actually has pulled up data from a lot of sources and been able to provide it. But I think we're going one level further in terms of what you can see, because now you actually have cameras in vehicles that are able to capture orders of magnitude more information. So
can you describe rounds in Veniam? So first it was 500K seed or pre-seed, then it was Series A, am I right? What was the amount? So it's total of 45 million. Can you?
Sure. So we started with the seed round of $500,000. And then we raised a Series A in August 2014 of $5 million, which was led by True Ventures, who invested $3 million at the time, and then Union Square Ventures did the rest. Now I realize as I speak to you that the names of the rounds have changed a lot. So now in 2023, a $5 million round will probably be a seed round, or even a pre-seed round, because rounds have gotten so much bigger. But then our Series B was in December 2017, so almost 3 years later, and that one was $25 million, so substantially more. And then about 18 months later, in 2018, we raised another 15. That was when we were basically looking for cash to go through the entire product development cycle with the automakers. And then COVID happened when we were thinking of raising potentially another round of financing. So we had to be very, very disciplined. And the best advice, by the way, that I got was raise a lot of money and spend very little. And indeed, if you think about, all of the ups and downs of the economy in the last few years, and I think now with capital being so much more costly than it was then, I think that a lot of entrepreneurs are learning the wisdom of that advice.
Does Nexar raise money now this year?
So before acquiring us, actually, Nexar raised something like $155 million. So that was a Series D. And and the company obviously continues to grow, and it's following the natural scale-up path, and but obviously it also already is well in business and has hundreds of thousands of customers.
Can you elaborate on deciding to move from hardware to software in Veniam? So was it really difficult to promote or scale hardware production and distribution, or what were the reasons?
It was definitely very hard. I think it was very, very useful and important to us in the beginning to actually do both hardware and software. The main reason we were doing hardware at the time was because there were no devices for vehicles that were multi-network, so that had both the cellular and Wi-Fi and V2X. One thing that slowed us down was that even though there was a standard, the regulation for vehicle-to-vehicle communication and vehicle-to-infrastructure communication, even today, is still not clear. And so the automakers were waiting for there to be a mandate to put vehicle-to-vehicle communication in their roadmaps, and no mandate occurred, neither in the US nor in Europe. And so this is why we then focused a lot more on Wi-Fi. But the reason I say it was really important for us to do hardware in the beginning was that our team acquired very specialized skills in deploying software in embedded systems, which is very different from doing it in the cloud or doing it in a computer that has way more processing and storage capability. And turns out that that skill has now been tremendously important at Nexar, because it has been instrumental towards actually putting AI models running at the edge versus the cloud. And so I'm actually very happy that we were able to have that experience, because later also working with tier 1 suppliers like Bosch, Continental, and so on, for the automakers, the fact that we knew how to write software that was very efficient with very small footprint was a real competitive advantage.
400 patents, it's a very huge number.
Well, it's 140. So
140. I thought that. Okay, even 140 is a very big number. So how usually technologies are developed? So can you describe this university process?
It's a great question, because actually there was another advice, and I always encourage founders and entrepreneurs to talk to as many people as they can. And there was a conference where we received an award, and I met another founder who had done multiple wireless tech startups. And he told me, how are you handling he asked me, how are you handling your patent portfolio? Because in this area, it's really important in wireless communications to have a strong patent portfolio. And just to give you an idea, at that time, I looked it up, Nokia had 77,000 patents. So it was like, and I said, well, we already, when I was a professor, we started writing something, we work with the patent office. And he said, no, you don't need just a patent lawyer. What you need is a patent strategy firm that designs your portfolio. And so I asked him, so who do you work with? And he recommended a patent strategy firm in Chicago that I hired. And basically what they did is, first of all, they had a couple of meetings with us to understand our business plan, what we wanted to do, what was our strategy, what was our vision, and so on. And then they did their research, and they come back and they say, hey, this whole space of Internet of Moving Things that you guys are thinking about is wide open. There are practically no patents covering how to build networks of things that move, so vehicles, autonomous vehicles, all of that. And so we suggest that you cover this and this and this and this area. And then we took, some of our engineers who had PhDs and experience developing complex technologies. And they spend about 5% of their time coming up with ideas and writing bullet points, and then the patent firm would come up with the patents, and this was how we were able to push out. So some of these were things because we were among the first to have real vehicle mesh networks out there, and we had the largest one. We were encountering practical problems that nobody else was finding, and so we were having a log of all of these things and coming up with patent ideas from there. And then other things were things that were problems that would come up when, say, autonomous vehicles wanted to operate in a fleet. And some of them were use cases of our technology that we were learning with customers. So it just became a process, innovation process. And I think we adopted it very, very early for a startup. So most startups don't do that. But we had an internal process for it, and this is how those patents came about. What I find amazing is that together with those patent lawyers, we actually have an acceptance rate of the patents, which is like 100%, which is crazy if you think about it. So they are really, really good at what they do.
I thought that somewhere in university, some scientists are creating new technologies, ideas, and then patent, but you describe the process when you have a firm and they help, and your engineers put some of their time to describe what you already do, I understand, and it gives you huge IP portfolio. During those years of Veniam developing, was it helpful in some way when some companies wanted to use the same technologies or wanted to copy your technology?
It gave us credibility with automakers and with tier one suppliers because, again, it's an external entity, the patent office, saying, hey, these guys have come up with a new invention and an innovative process. And so I think it added to our credibility. But in the end, customers really want to see the technology at work and what it can do for them and understand, how does this solve a problem that I have. So that part is more important. But it did, I think, also affect our valuation in that people knew that, we had a lot of technology that was very, very innovative and different. We won a number of awards as well. But these are all nice to have, but I think they're not must-haves. Must-haves really is to have a platform or a product that solves the real issues and pains that the customers are facing.
Is it expensive to register a patent?
Yeah, I think per patent you think about $20,000 over the lifetime of the patent, at least, something like that. So you need to raise venture capital to be able to protect your IP for sure.
Do you have international team now? And did you have it when you were managing Veniam?
Yeah, so we're very international right now because we have, about 2/3 of the team in Israel, about 1/3 of the team in Portugal, and then we have some people in, Japan, US, other parts of Europe, where, we also do our business development and sales and so on. In Veniam, we had multiple phases. So we had an office in Mountain View, we had an office in New York, we had an office in Singapore over a period of time, and we always had a small team in Japan. But most of the engineering and product was located, actually all of it was located in and around Porto, Portugal.
What were your lessons of managing an international team?
So I think today, in retrospect, I think it's always a hard decision. There's several hard decisions that you need to do in terms of how to scale. One of them is whether to focus on a single geography and then grow somewhere. Like Nexar started very, very focused on the US and to prove that we can do it at scale in the US. And now we're in a position to do it elsewhere. We have a very, very solid, successful business in Japan, and we're expanding further. With Veniam, we tried to go to Asia and America at the same time, and also personally, it was very hard because you have an 8-hour time difference to California, an 8-hour time difference from Portugal to Singapore. So it was, I was permanently jet lagged for years. And so one has to think about those tolls. The other thing is also the cultures are very, very different. The business culture in the US is very different from Europe, is very different from Japan. So today I might have postponed our internationalization, do it later. On the other hand, when you're working with auto OEMs, these are globally operating companies with teams everywhere. So you have to be ready to talk with teams everywhere. And if you only have like 20 automakers that you can sell to, you're not going to say, oh, I'm only going to sell to 2 in America, or I'm only going to sell to 3 in Germany or 2 in Japan. Is that you can't do that. So you're automatically forced to work globally if you're in an industry like that.
And you called it accidental entrepreneurship. So how were you learning how to manage teams, how to mentor people in a team? So what were your main challenges or lessons that you took from that?
I was very, very fortunate because I started managing people very early in my career, because when I finished my master's, I was hired by the Technical University of Munich to do my PhD, but also to manage a new master's program that was taught entirely in English for the first time. It was the Master of Science in Communications Engineering, which was basically sponsored by the German industry and had students from all over the world come to Munich to receive their education in English, and then they would go back to their home countries. And I was responsible for everything. I was responsible for marketing, for recruiting, and I had a small team to manage the day-to-day of the program. And that was kind of my first startup. It was also a new program. And
it was before Veniam.
It was way before Veniam, yeah. Then when I became a professor, I was supervising students. So I graduated 16 PhD students and always had a pretty large research group. And I also started an institute that grew from 5 people to 100 people in 5 years. So that was like my second, big startup. Then I was asked by the Portuguese government and the Science Foundation to manage the Carnegie Mellon Portugal program, which was a $77 million program over 5 years. And I was the national director, so I also had a team and I had to manage all those things. I also learned a lot about politics at the time and how to manage, university diplomacy and how to bridge the gap between universities and companies, because we also had corporate sponsors at the time. And so I always had a component of managing people and doing, communications, marketing, and so on, even in my career as a professor and as a researcher. What was different is sales. Sales is quite different. The negotiations is quite different. Fundraising is quite different. And I was incredibly lucky because being funded by True Ventures and Union Square Ventures meant that I was not only, receiving coaching and training from some of the best venture capital firms in the world, but also from their founders. And so these communities really help each other. And then I had a CEO coach from the United States for 6 years. So Khalid Halim was an incredible support for me during the different phases. And some of them were really, really hard. I mean, especially this last phase during COVID. I'm, naturally used to seeing a lot of people in person every day. And suddenly all of that was gone. And everything was over Zoom and over Slack. So I really had to deal with depression and a lot of difficult moments, particularly during that phase. And so having that support system and also amazing colleagues. I mean, the team at Veniam was always really a source of strength and joy and creativity, and many of them, including my former chief technology officer, Rui Costa, have been working with me for 8, 9, even 10 years, and stayed on. So I usually avoid the word family because family you don't choose. It's very specific to what a family is, and I have 3 kids, so family means something very specific. But several members of Veniam are like family to me, and because of everything that we went through together. Yeah.
Can you recommend some approaches to hiring people?
Oh, I am very, very tough recruiting because I've made so many mistakes, and so and some areas were more difficult for me to recruit than others. And being a tech founder and coming from engineering, it was easier for me to understand and spot technical and engineering talent than, for example, sales and marketing. And so the first advice I would give is don't hire too early. I think it's really, really important to have a lot of business before you scale up your company. And if you're not sure whether you have product market fit or not, then you definitely don't have it. Because as I learned later, someone told me, product market fit is when customers are pulling the product out of your hands, and then and it really is like that. So product market fit when you're feeling there's this market pull rather than constant market push. And you don't really have a feeling for that until you actually have gone through that. And you shouldn't hire before you're ready for that. So I think the initial team, it's really important to have generalists that are and idealists and generalists and very positive people, and also a few warriors that worry. So this mix of, so I try to have mix of people that on the one hand are very positive, but where I don't compromise is in the level of energy. So people have to be energetic and enthusiastic. Over time I value more and more people who communicate really well and go straight to the point and are very crisp. I value a lot people that are very, very intelligent and smart and fast on their feet, and people who really, really are curious about everything, not just the technical things, not just the company, not just the business, but just in general, people who are curious. And I think every company needs people that look after the soul of the company. So people that are also just kind. And so we tried to find people that, I also avoid the word passionate, because passion sometimes is something fleeting that, comes and goes. But I think people that are committed to a certain ideal, people that, want something to happen very, very hard, more than others, but at the same time are very generous and kind. And Nexar has a very similar culture to Veniam, and that has been really, really interesting to see. I think there's a number of people that want things a lot. What I think the Israelis, where I think the differences are, is that our Israeli colleagues are much more tolerant to failure than we are. So they will go and it's as long as you're moving in the right direction, you just keep going and keep doing. I think Portuguese tend to be a lot more risk averse, and avoiding failure is a big thing in our society. So I think this mix of having a foot on the gas pedal and a foot on the brake is something that actually works pretty well. And when hiring, you want to have this diverse mix of temperaments, but always with a very high level of energy and resilience and determination.
Did you feel product market fit in Veniam sometimes, and can you share the most bright and exciting points during this more than 10 years of path?
Well, it was incredibly exciting to have the first fleet of vehicles and seeing consumers using the Wi-Fi and having every day the metrics. Oh, we have 10,000 sessions. Oh, we have, so it's like, and you see this growth. What I learned then was that there's one thing that is initial growth, and then the other thing is sustained growth, right? Mm-hmm. And crossing the chasm is definitely very hard to do because one thing is to have early adopters, the other thing is to have broader market, and so I really respect Eran and Bruno, the co-founders of Nexar, for having been able to build an incredibly successful business on the dash cam, and now continuing to do that with us on the data side of things. And the other moments were when we had several of the biggest brands in the auto industry, signing engineering contracts with us. That was the other one, because here's this small company out of Portugal that is working with these huge car manufacturers, and given how hard it is, you have to go through so many gates to even get their attention. So that was a huge validation point. And the same thing then with the dashcam companies. There I knew from a product market fit was when you're able to sign large contracts within a few months, then you know that you have something that people really need, because otherwise they wouldn't be so fast at allocating resources. It turns out that it's really hard to persuade people to separate with their money, and so it's product market fit, I think, is the number one obsession that entrepreneurs must have. And venture capital is not always good because it allows you to pretend that you are a real company before you actually are a real company.
So when you get a check from an investor, you probably feel, wow, cool, we did it. But that's where things just start.
I never had that feeling ever. Even though we closed $45 million, it was always the opposite. So first is that when we finally closed, I was completely exhausted and burned out. Just to give you an idea, for Series A, everything looks so amazing and easy when you tell the story in a certain way, but then the reality is very different. For example, I could tell you, I met Malik in San Francisco, and 5 days later I had a term sheet from True Ventures. So that's true, it's the truth, but it's not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I received 55 no's before I had a term sheet from True Ventures, and it was a 6-month process. And so people might say, oh, 6 months to a term sheet? Wow, or so fast. But no, it was a horrible grind, and it required every single time to keep, refining the pitch. And I think in pretty much all of the fundraisers, I went in with one story, then I had to take a hiatus to rethink the pitch, and then go into the next group of investors with a different story, and then it played out. But you never know where opportunities and investors and sales is going to come from. So having this really broad network and talking all the time and reconnecting, and it's incredibly important. And I think sometimes entrepreneurs underestimate how important that is. Right now, I am definitely very, very excited about the whole AI space. I see tremendous possibilities. So I think the next 10 years in terms of development around AI are going to be tremendously exciting. And so I think it's a great time to be an entrepreneur.
So what challenges and opportunities do you think in transportation sector?
Well, for one, you can look at Porto. It's a city that was built in the Middle Ages. Definitely not for cars. Definitely not for autonomous vehicles. And so I think one big challenge in general in transportation is that cities and environments are very different from each other. One thing is an American suburb, the other one is a medieval downtown like Porto. And so I think we need multimodality, so lots and lots of different types of transportation. And obviously we want it to be sustainable and affordable. So that people can use it and we don't destroy the planet. And so it's a huge challenge because right now our entire infrastructure has been designed for personalized cars. And I often wonder, how can we live with a model like this? Because nobody in their sane mind, would accept a system where you have millions and millions, hundreds of millions of cars that are only used 5% of the time, that are built for 5 people and only carry 1 or 2, that clog our roads and our cities. It doesn't make any sense at all. And it's not a technology issue because we know how to build electrical cars, we know how to build services that allow us to share these vehicles. I think it's harder to have the vehicles drive themselves, so it isn't as easy as sometimes people thought. And so, but still, if we were able to, create areas inside cities where you would have shared autonomous electrical and connected vehicles, then that would already go a long way into turning mobility into a more, equitable and sustainable system. And so I think that that's the big challenge. But I'm concerned that it's not a technology issue at all. It's mostly a public policy and societal issue than anything else.
Do you think that one day there would be only automatic vehicles and that people will not have cars but will use mostly some public service?
It's definitely the world that I dream of, and also the world that Veniam and Nexar wanted to build from the start. And at Nexar, we are working towards, having more and more information that allows a city to be managed in a very, very, sustainable way. And also with technologies like HD maps, for example, that enable the vehicles to become more and more automated and more autonomous. The shared piece, again, I think is one that we could achieve already today. All you needed was for cities to say we don't want any private cars within this perimeter of 5 kilometers inside of the city, and provide shared public transportation, which could be privately operated. So there's space for companies in the private sector here. And it would also make the life of automated driving and autonomous vehicles much easier, because right now the issues with autonomous vehicles have a lot to do with the need to avoid accidents with human drivers. And on top of that, also, the vehicles, once they actually can go through predictable routes, so specific lanes and things like that, the whole self-driving problem becomes somewhat easier. And so that would definitely accelerate that point. Personally, as a citizen, besides knowing that we could have a much more sustainable mobility system, is that I don't want to spend time in traffic. And I don't want to be, driving when I can be having quality time with my loved ones, or doing other much more stimulating activities than, stop and go traffic jams. And so I personally use the bus all the time, and I walk a lot. And I think, eventually, I think that's what I would love to see. Is it going to happen? I don't know. I was actually hoping that we would move towards that future much faster. But again, the societal issues of technology are way more complex than we sometimes like to believe.
Is car sharing services developing in Portugal?
Less so actually than I would expect. I mean, for sure we have Uber and other alternatives as well. And I think that in Porto and Lisbon, for sure, the metro made a huge difference, and they're expanding the metro networks. So I think that that's positive news. But we really, have no excuse for not using more electrical bikes here. It goes up and down, but electrical bikes are able to make that possible even for people that are not in the best shape. And scooters, electrical scooters. So I was surprised to see that they've been eliminated in certain cities. But I think it's possible to regulate the electrical scooters also in a way. But I think that personalized mobility, multimodal, with very small, efficient devices or vehicles, I think is the way to go.
What do you think could be new startups in that field? Transportation, for example, maybe you have some ideas which are not ready to be launched in Nexar, but what could be other
Well, adjacent to
possibilities?
Nexar is, there's suddenly, tons and tons of work to do still in acquiring information from all sorts of different sensors and devices that are relevant for the city. And I like the boring stuff, detecting whether plumbing is at risk or not, whether infrastructures are up and down. There are beautiful examples of drones and robots being used to maintain infrastructure. I think there's lots of space for that as well in robotics and AI. And this is billions of euros. So I think the infrastructure is going to need, tons of investment still. That is happening a little bit now in the US with the Biden administration, but I think also in Europe. I think there's a lot of work to do also in figuring out how to build communities. And so there are some startups that kind of want to reconnect people to their neighbors. I think that's a wonderful idea of having neighbors know each other, share things. I was listening to an interview there where somebody was saying that she had lived in a community where people in a big house would cook for each other, so she only needed to cook twice a month and had a warm meal every day. And I'm not, a communist by any stretch of mind, but I was thinking that cities are more than just, infrastructure or transportation. And so carpooling would be one community building activity. But I wonder if in social connection there is something that we can do that would make transportation more attractive, precisely because you get a chance to meet interesting people, be closer to others. The pandemic put, cold water on a lot of these things, but at least in Europe, it feels like, those worst times are over. And so I wonder if there's a way that we can connect people with transportation. In this sector, I think we have to look at new markets. And if you look at Africa and you think that the population is going to double until 2030, it's the youngest population on the planet, and they have very different transportation and mobility needs, and it's a huge emerging market. And so I would encourage entrepreneurs and founders to not just think about, the developed countries and the West, and where supposedly there's a lot of capital here, but there are, a billion consumers or more in each of the other continents that they can target. And so then the question is, how do you do that? So I'm fascinated right now by the opportunities in Africa and India and in other places. And so, and there the problems are very different. Population density is much higher, but at the same time, people might be more willing to alternatives to the car than in countries like the United States, where the car became part of the identity almost, and where it's very, very hard to change.
So will it be possible to charge EV car very fast?
I've seen very interesting solutions where even the pavement is charging the vehicle while it does the drive, which I thought was really interesting. And in fact, this city was one of the early adopters of trams, electrical trams, same as in San Francisco. And you had these electrical cables. It wasn't wireless, but where basically, they were being charged along the way. What I'm seeing is mostly coming from the surface, the solutions that I've been seeing. But for some time, I suppose that cable is still going to be the number one solution for charging vehicles. But it's becoming, faster and faster to charge these vehicles. So that's good news.
Do you know some technologies which are not broadly known for usual people, which will change our lives?
Technologies that are not broadly... It's funny that you asked that because in October 2022, I was asked to moderate. I think the church is telling us that we must go. But I was asked to moderate a panel with 4 leading startup CEOs in the AI space. And one of them, who had worked at Google for many, many years, said, AI is already able to write better than you, do poems, do all of these things. And people didn't know about ChatGPT. And he was like, and the audience was like, yeah. and then 2 months later, OpenAI releases ChatGPT. And then people realized, they were right. And so it's very, very hard to predict where these things are coming from. Right now, I am definitely very, very excited about the whole AI space. I see tremendous possibilities. I mean, to put, a great doctor in everybody's pocket, in everybody's smartphone, or have each child have a personalized tutor that makes learning, more fun and engaging, and where we can also give kids who normally would not have access to a doctor, say in Africa, or would not have access to individualized teaching, to have that be an affordable, real possibility. It's huge. And so I recognize, the risks of AI generating fake information and all of that, that turns our public space even more toxic. So that risk exists. But the opportunities are immense. And so I'm seeing every single day ways how this technology can really make a huge difference. And it's one that I understand. I see similar developments in longevity, cancer treatment, and so on. But these are areas that I don't know enough about to be able to speculate. But in the case of AI, and what we're doing at Nexar, of being able to use all these vehicle cameras to actually see the world and share that in ways that are useful for maps, for navigation, for planning, for all sorts of things. I mean, in my mind, that's just the beginning. So I think the next 10 years in terms of development around AI are going to be tremendously exciting. And so I think it's a great time to be an entrepreneur. Companies are a bit like people. They start as babies, then they crawl, then they walk, then they become adults, and then they grow, and then eventually most companies actually also die at some point. Google and Facebook and Intel and Cisco and all these companies are all there, and so the concentration of talent was just incredible. I would say that for a number of companies right now, it's less necessary to go to Silicon Valley or to the US in general than it was before. And eventually also our business was mostly concentrated again in Detroit, Munich, Paris, Tokyo. And so Portugal, when you think of it, is actually quite central when you're running a global business.
How have you decided to move to Silicon Valley in 2013 or 14?
I actually went in August 2014, right after we closed our Series A. For me, it was a very natural decision because I had lived in the US before. And so I had been a Fulbright scholar at Cornell University during my PhD. And then later on, I had done a sabbatical also at MIT. And what I knew was that, in the tech space, many, if not most, of the biggest, most successful companies were started in the US. So I knew that sooner or later we were going to have to work with the US companies, and so I wanted to go there. But what was also clear was that Veniam needed a lot of capital, and it was very hard to get that in Portugal for sure, because there just wasn't any meaningful venture capital industry in Portugal at the time. This is very different now. Portugal has 7 unicorns, a vibrant startup ecosystem that is emerging. So we were right at the beginning with a couple of other companies at starting a tech company out of Portugal and wanting to grow. On top of that, it was economic crisis, right? And particularly also in the country. And so we decided to keep engineering in Portugal, but have marketing and sales and product in the US. And coming from academia as a professor, I knew that I didn't know enough about business and sales and the commercial side of things. So that's why I went and looked for co-founders who had that experience, and they happened to be Americans. And so Robin and Roy, right from the start, they said, for this type of company, the US is by far the best place. And so we had initial investors from the US in our seed round, and then eventually, also American VCs. And so going to Silicon Valley was a very natural decision.
How you developed your network there?
Yeah, I used very much my academic credentials as much as possible, and I was able to get a visiting appointment at Stanford that gave me a lot of connections. Our VCs, in particular True Ventures, was all about building a community of founders, and so very quickly, I also had groups of founders that met on a regular basis, and so that helped expand things. I had my former sponsors from Cisco and so on also around there. And so step by step, I also met other Portuguese who were in the Bay Area. So really, from all corners, having 3 children also helped because they were in school, and they went to the German school in Silicon Valley because they were at the German school here in Portugal as well, which meant that through the parents of their friends, I also met entrepreneurs and industrialists and so on. So, and then even in our church community, I ended up meeting lots and lots of people. So yeah, when I put together all of the different places where I met people, is actually across all areas of life.
When you talked about these meetings, regular meetings with other founders, was it like a forum group or a mastermind, or what was it?
Precisely a forum group, very modeled after YPO, the Young Presidents Organization, because the John Callahan, the founder of True Ventures, he is a member of YPO, and so he created groups of founders that met with a facilitator once a month for 4 hours to share everything from business, personal, family, all the struggles and questions. And so I had that very early on, and it was tremendously helpful.
Was it necessary to create this network in order to get future funding?
I don't know if it's tied to future funding, because I think the future funding is tied to achieving certain inflection points, right, in your startup journey. I mean, companies are a bit like people. They start as babies, then they crawl, then they walk, then they become adults, and then they grow, and then eventually most companies actually also die at some point. And so investors and VCs look at these inflection points. Like initially there's a technology looking for a market, for example, in our case. Then you find initial customers, product market fit. Then you have a beachhead, you try to scale, your product and so on and so forth. And so what I think this network is tremendously important is to actually find those opportunities, find those leads, have the person that introduces you to the right person in that customer, have the other founder that introduces to the right next investor. So you need a huge network to succeed in a business, especially like ours, which is B2B and mobility, transportation, communication, at the intersection of all these different sectors. You really need a lot of acquaintances in all areas. And then there's also on the supplier side, you're going to need cloud, you're going to need expertise in patents, as we were discussing. So all of these different things come from this network, and so nurturing this network is step number one in my perspective.
Mm-hmm. And not only money, like I understood, but also what was this smart money, or what was help of investors for your business?
Yeah, lots and lots of experiences. I think that was really, people sometimes think, oh, smart money is money that gives you this contact or that contact or and so on. And so I think in the end, really working with a VC firm that has built companies like Fitbit and another big companies, Peloton and so on. They just saw many different companies, especially in this space, doing hardware and software together, and in the Internet of Things. They saw many journeys, and so they recognize patterns that you as a founder who's doing it for the first time have a harder time recognizing. And sometimes they're wrong, obviously, and you have to persist on your idea, but I think benefiting from that experience is excellent. And then the brand is really important. When you are supported or backed by a really well-known VC, that makes it easier to access, other investors, maybe not so much customers in our case, but definitely other investors.
When you moved, did you feel excitement that, oh wow, I'm in the center of world and startups and technologies?
Yeah, I had felt that already once in my career, which was at MIT. Actually, like a couple of weeks ago, I was in Boston at MIT again, and I was telling my son, who's now second year of electrical and computer engineering in Munich, and I said, when I first got appointed here as a visiting professor, I always had to pinch myself to believe I'm really at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And Silicon Valley was a little bit like that. In that you see all these, Google and Facebook and Intel and Cisco and all these companies are all there. And so the concentration of talent was just incredible. And what I loved the most was the level of energy. It's like people were just enthusiastic and excited. And I don't care so much whether it's fake or not, because it just energized me irrespective of whether they meant it or not. and I used to have that conversation with friends in Europe. We sort of say, oh, everything is just hype and fake and so on. But and superficial, and the usual criticism is superficial. And I used to say, what is it better? Is it better superficial and nice, or superficial and unfriendly? And so I actually don't think so. I actually found that there was a lot of depth, certainly on the technical side, and also on this whole question of product, business model, and so on. People really wanted to know and understand and figuring out, and it's a huge intellectual challenge to bring a new product into a market, or to disrupt a category, or create a new category, or disrupt an existing one. And so I found there was a lot of depth. The shadow side for me is that it's actually very much a bubble. So Silicon Valley has its own community, its own rules, and I actually realized that in many ways, having had before the opportunity to obviously grow up and work in Europe, but also being connected to Asia and other places was I always felt that people have no idea, or many people there had no idea of how ordinary people in other places actually live. And so when you're looking for, product market fit and so on, having this broader perspective is really important. I mean, for example, investors would tell me, oh, why do people want to use Wi-Fi networks? Everybody has unlimited cell data plans. And I was like, no, they don't. I was like, so if I had $100 every time somebody told me, oh, everybody has unlimited cell data plans. And I was like, and that's just one example where sometimes Silicon Valley felt detached from the rest of the world. In the meantime, over the years, also America changed dramatically in 10 years, and so did Silicon Valley. And so I think that today an entrepreneur will have a very different experience, perhaps from the one that I had. But I was very much energized. I also, over time, was a bit frustrated sometimes by this belief that technology will solve all the problems in the world, which I don't think is true. I think in the end, for society to absorb new technologies, it requires a lot more than just software. You need regulations and public policies, and you need operations. You need so many things that people typically underestimate. And so I think the world is a lot more complex sometimes than what Silicon Valley thinks.
Did you choose between different places in the US, like New York, or you just knew that Silicon Valley is the right place?
So we went to Silicon Valley first because our investors were there, and because at the time it made sense for us to be close to big tech, given that we were putting a mesh networking technology into place. And so it helped a lot also that all the major auto makers are in Silicon Valley. So Silicon Valley is the meeting place, even though obviously their main business is in Detroit, in Munich, or in Tokyo. They have R&D, research and technology scouts in Silicon Valley. So even today I go to Silicon Valley because, within one day I can meet with Google for breakfast, Intel for lunch, then I can have an afternoon meeting with, any of these large tech companies. And at the same time, there's Ford, there's Volkswagen, there's Daimler, everybody has an office there. It doesn't mean that they make decisions, but they open doors and they help you navigate the broader organizations. And this B2B sales process is really complicated. You have to navigate the organization. And so they have teams in Silicon Valley whose job is to help you navigate their organizations. And from that perspective, Silicon Valley is a good place to go. We had an office in New York for a period of time, which was much better from the point of view of time difference. Given that we had our engineering in Portugal, and it is a different 5 hours or 8 hours is a big difference in terms of the window that you have to work with people. The culture is very different in New York from Silicon Valley as well. So it really depends on your area of work. If New York or Silicon Valley is a better, or Miami right now is, or Austin. I mean, in the meantime, what happened was that many founders and a lot of the VCs moved out of the Bay Area, and so you're starting to see clusters and startup ecosystems show up elsewhere, and also in Europe. Unfortunately, also here in Portugal. So today I'm not sure that. Silicon Valley is a must-have on the path of many startups. I think for us it was beneficial.
How can you compare life in Portugal and in the US?
The weather in California is very similar, so that was that was helpful, and it also has a lot of Hispanic, Latino influence in California. So there were a number of things that resonated. My kids played soccer in California, which in other parts of the US might be impossible. But I think, you know, Portugal is an old European country with an incredible history and heritage, which is struggling to, you know, take flight from its past, including, you know, 47 years of dictatorship, which, even though, you know, we're celebrating soon, you know, the 50th anniversary of the revolution, some ways of thinking are still stuck in people's minds, whether you like it or not. This takes generations to, you know, to change. And so we have a big generational gap, you know, between the grandparents and the parents and children. There's many different, you know, generations and sub-generations in Portugal right now that have very different views of the world and of society, and in the U.S. what I found is that over time you started seeing you know, more and more bipolarization in every aspect between, you know, left and right. So everything suddenly became way more political than it was when I arrived. When I arrived, I actually loved the fact that people were ambitious and they're focused on what they wanted to do and achieve, and they were also capable of recognizing the merit of others, which is sometimes lacking in Portugal. And so for people who like to do things and like to, you know, build things, California was just fantastic because, you know, you got a lot of support and recognition for doing that. Whereas in Portugal, you always got more skeptical voices and more risk-averse voices than you will find in the United States. But things have changed dramatically in the last 10 years. I think Portugal has become more open and more entrepreneurial, and the US has become more conflicted internally than it was before.
That's why you decided to move back, or not?
No, it was really a very personal decision. Was that we had lived in Germany before, and we came back to Portugal in part because we wanted our children to be close to the grandparents. And have this broader family around us. And when we went to the US, I was traveling like crazy because I had a subsidiary in Singapore. I had to travel to Detroit, another place, to see customers. And I had to come back to Portugal to visit our engineering team. And then my parents-in-law would say, "What are you doing here? Our daughter is alone with 3 kids in California. And what are you doing in Porto?" So it didn't really make sense because I was spending so little time there. So we moved the family first back to Portugal. I stayed on, but it didn't really work to be so far away from my family at the time. And eventually also our business was mostly concentrated again in Detroit, Munich, Paris, Tokyo. And so Portugal, when you think of it, is actually quite central when you're running a global business.
10 years change a lot in those countries, and you think that now it is bad decision to go to Silicon Valley to do business and raise
I don't know. You know, as I become older, I'm less and less sure of things. So I tend to give more and more answers around "it depends." Then I mean, the other day I caught myself saying that, you know, strong convictions is the privilege of the young, because life teaches you that things are way more complex than you imagine. And so I would say that for a number of companies right now, it's less necessary to go to Silicon Valley or to the US in general than it was before. Also because venture capital firms in the US are investing more and more outside of the US. This wasn't true 15 years ago. It started becoming more frequent when we were raising money, but we were still among the first European startups, you know, to raise tens of millions of dollars outside of Europe. and then now it's much more common and much more that they will do that. So that's one point. For certain industries, I mean, there's still a lot of benefit if you're in the semiconductor industry, or depending on where you are, right? There's still a lot of decisions that are done in the San Francisco Bay Area. It still has two of the best universities in the world as well. So it really depends on the kind of business that you're building.
Do you think it is advantage that in Portugal you can hire people with less salaries than in Silicon Valley? Or
yeah, no, for sure. I think in the end you're always doing your P&L and figuring out how can you control your costs, especially because when you're raising money, it's such a hard competitive process that then every euro that you spent, how much blood, sweat, and tears went into raising that. That's why I'm, also on boards, and I always think that boards of directors should not encourage entrepreneurs and founders to spend a lot of money very, very fast. I think that changed dramatically now, because capital now, for the first time in 13 years, is actually pretty expensive with the interest rates as high as they are. And so I think for sure, being able to find amazing talent at a lower cost than you will have in other places is a competitive advantage still. Having said that, the salaries are going up very fast. Also because today, and the pandemic really changed the dynamic there, because people started working from home, working remotely, and then said, why do I need to work for a local company if I can work exactly the same thing from home for somebody who pays me twice the salary? So I know lots of people who are doing that, and so the salaries here in the tech sector are for sure going up very fast.
Do you think it is possible to manage a startup completely remotely without offices?
Well, if you think about Automatic, so the company that does WordPress, they've always operated in that way. I actually talked with Matt a couple of times about it. I think it's possible. I don't think it's how I like to work. I like to go to an office, see my team. I like to be in front of the whiteboard, and I only use Zoom and Slack because I'm forced to. But this is a very personal thing. My background is that besides studying engineering, I also studied music. And nobody can imagine an orchestra or a band, not being in the same physical space, not breathing, the same, sharing the same, biological sensations together. I think there's a lot of value in having a joint personal space. But it really depends on what kind of company and what kind of culture you want to build. I don't see work as a transaction where you give me your time and I pay you, or you give me, code and I pay you. It's just not the kind of work philosophy that I have. My philosophy has always been that we spent a huge percentage of our lifetime at work doing work with colleagues. So I want to be surrounded by people that I really, really like, doing things that I really, really like, and I want to do those in person as much as possible.
Okay, last question about Silicon Valley. What were the most valuable lessons you learned there? And for example, for people who were not in the US or in Silicon Valley, so what are main ideas or insights what you can share with entrepreneurs?
So many of these are going to sound very familiar because now they are repeated over and over again on LinkedIn and other platforms. But certainly the number one thing is that companies die for one reason and one reason only: they run out of money. So that's the number one reason why a company dies. And so I understood the importance of cash. It sounds naive, but the truth is that since three of my parents were doctors in the National Health Service, my mother was a high school teacher, my father was a judge, so I grew up raised in a sense of public service. That's what my family was about. And so the commercial side of things, the business side of things was something that I needed to learn. It wasn't, I didn't grow up with it. It was actually poor taste to talk about money. Nobody talked about money. There wasn't a lot of money available, and nobody talked about it. So it was enough for books to learn, and that's it. So it wasn't. And what was valued was intellect and culture. So that those were the things that were valued in my family. So I learned in Silicon Valley that you have to pay salaries at the end of the month, and to do that you have to really watch your finances very carefully. Now you might say, did you learn it positively or negatively? I think I learned it by watching other founders fail at that, spending way too much money way too early. And I decided this is not how I want to run things. So that was one thing. The second thing was that dreams matter. So ideas that seem completely crazy, it is wonderful to have an ecosystem where it's allowed to have ideas that are crazy, where people give you the benefit of the doubt. And I don't buy into we love failure. Nobody loves failure. I think that's just not human, at least not the humans that I know. But I think the point is a different one, is that this belief that it's by experimenting that we learn and bring out new things, that it's a process. And I think that, and thank you for asking that question, because I think that in the end, what I learned in Silicon Valley is the process by which you bring new products and companies into the world. And it's essentially actually very much derived from the scientific method, which is you draw hypotheses, you run experiments, and then the experiments are not success or failures. The experiments are neutral. They give you a result. And then based on this result, you make the next decision. And having this dispassionate look at the process, rather than saying, oh, I'm putting all my bets in this, and if it fails, I'm a failure, which I think often gets mixed up when we talk about entrepreneurship. I think that dispassionate look about the process by which you create products and you launch products, and if it fails, you try something else, and you just. I think that's something that is very unique about Silicon Valley, but fortunately now has been exported to other places.
Cool. Thank you very much, João.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
I feel energized with your energy talking about startups, Silicon Valley, and creating new technologies.
No, and thank you for doing this podcast and also helping other entrepreneurs.
Okay.
Max Pog builds a startup studio.